the last season of Ken Bates, 2002-03, Chelsea spent basically nothing, £2 million spending, if that, in that whole season. The first season of Abramovich, he spent £153 million.
Welcome to the latest episode of Season 2 of Football Uncovered. In Season 1, we took you inside Blackburn and Leeds, Portsmouth and Liverpool, FIFA and a lot more. We heard about extraordinary stories of football chaos, cock-ups and outright corruption. This season, we're going inside 8 more Premier League clubs, as well as having 2 special episodes. One about life after the Premier League and one about the very future of club football at the highest level. I'm your host, Will Brazier, and with me every episode is Sporting Intel's Nick Harris. Nick, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Looking forward to this one.
Yes, me too. This season, it's not just me and Nick. We're also joined by a guest each week, usually a fan of the club we're talking about, or someone who has followed them very closely and knows all the inside stories. As well as sharing all the usual inside stories from each club, we'll of course be looking at the owners of the club, how they came to be there, where they've taken the club so far, but most importantly, what's next. Today, it's Chelsea. I'm delighted to say we're joined by Jake Cohen, who is about as blue as they come. Jake, first of all, very good morning. What time is it over there?
It's 06 in the east coast of the U.S. In Boston, where I grew up and where I'm riding out the COVID pandemic.
Love that. I think you take the award of the earliest guest appearance, so congratulations.
And I should emphasize Jake now is a sports lawyer who works in football primarily. He does commercial contracts. He does, he knows people. He works with clubs. He works with players. He's done some really important discriminatory cases. This is somebody who works daily in sports law. He's a real Chelsea insider as well. He's met Mr. Abramovich, which is certainly something that I've never sat down for a coffee with Roman Abramovich. And you've met some of the players.
Mr. Abramovich and I, you may be surprised to know, travel in slightly different circles. So it was fortuitous that we just happened to have a mutual friend, and this mutual friend was just kind enough to subject Mr. Abramovich to my presence for a few minutes.
Wow. How'd you come to have a mutual friend with Roman Abramovich?
I think it's just one of those things. While we travel in slightly different circles, our friends and his friends, I guess, transcend these respective circles, and maybe we'll just leave it at that.
How was he?
Could not have been nicer. Again, this is somebody that I can provide no value to. I'm sure he gets accosted by the likes of me all the time. This was, at Stamford Bridge in his box where, he's with, his family and his friends. And could not have been nicer. Spent a few minutes. There was no sort of rushing me out. He seemed very engaged. Just really nice, down to earth person. And, I guess it's pretty ridiculous to just cast an entire segment of people with a broad stroke. But, you think when these, extremely wealthy, successful people are with their family and friends, they would not necessarily want to talk to a stranger. And I'm sure he didn't, but I did not get that impression at all. Could not have been nicer. And I think, with Mr. Abramovich, actions speak louder than words. He doesn't really speak too much in public. I think he gave one interview back in 2003 and hasn't said a single word in public until this week, really. But, through his actions with, these, personal interactions with fans like me, or, supporting the community, leading, massive efforts to combat anti-Semitism and discrimination in all forms, being a business leader in terms of UK COVID response, ensuring that every worker was paid in full, not taking advantage of other government subsidies, which not every Premier League club owner can say, providing free meals and housing through his hotels at NHS, and all of the other good works that he doesn't shout about, but the people on the ground are very fortunate to have his assistance. I just think that sort of encapsulates who Mr. Abramovich is as a person.
Should we get into the highs and lows of the Roman Abramovich era? Because there's obviously a lot to dissect, starting all the way back in 2002 with the Passover with your good friend Ken Bates?
I think that as we've said already, it was the money. Will's already alluded to the fact that they were spending in English football like nobody had seen before. I mean, I sent you guys a list of just some of the highlights and some of the seasonal spending. So in the season before Roman Abramovich took over, so the last season of Ken Bates, 2002-03, Chelsea spent basically nothing, very, very little on players. Philippe Oliveira at £500,000 was the most expensive, maybe out of £2 million spending, if that, in that whole season. The first season of Abramovich, he spent £153 million with Damien Duff, more than £20 million, £150 million the next season with Drogba costing, I think, 24, it might have been a bit more, 82 million the next season, SEN 34, 80 million the next season, Shevchenko 30 million. That was a big deal because it was kind of like, it was almost like the personal buy, wasn't it, that Abramovich wanted Shevchenko. So, and obviously in latter years, it's the last few years of, say, from 16, 17 onwards, 120 million, 235 million, 188 million, 40 million, 222 million. But back in 2003-04, these were transformative sums, and I think most neutrals sort of just looked at it and thought that it was incredible and that there was nothing particularly wrong with it. It was just it was fantasy football. Now, as I said, I was chatting to Jake about this the other day, and I was throwing in sort of the idea that stability isn't Roman Abramovich's watchword. He gets big name managers, lets them spend money, expects success, and sacks them if it doesn't come, and sometimes he sacks them when it does. It works for him. It's chaotic. It's unstable. That was sort of my view. Jake, you pulled me up on this and explain why actually there's a lot of stability at Stamford Bridge in the Abramovich era. Tell us why.
For sure. I mean, I think you brought up a great point. That is loads of managerial turnover, and despite that, Chelsea has continued to achieve pretty consistent success, over the past 16, 17 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is stability in terms of key decision makers. So, for example, Marina Granovskaya has been working for Mr. Abramovich, I think, since she graduated uni. Bruce Buck has been with Mr. Abramovich since day one. He's actually a season ticket holder, I think, dating back to the 90s. And as an American lawyer who came over to the UK for work and just somehow ended up, being the chairman of Chelsea Football Club, Bruce is someone I've always looked up to personally. Eugene Tannenbaum, I think he and Mr. Abramovich have known each other since they were kids. And, he's been one of Chelsea's few board members throughout Mr. Abramovich's tenure at Chelsea. Neil Bath has been at Chelsea since before Mr. Abramovich, and he's since became the head of the academy, and along with Michael Lamanello, who was there for about a decade, should be given a lot of credit for pretty revolutionary approach to youth development, where the approach to youth development is not just about providing a pathway to the first team. It's looked as a sort of investment stream, as a way to provide a return on investment, whether that be money coming in from transfer fees or a cost-effective addition to the first team. So the loan system, for example, has been extremely profitable, and I think the credit needs to be given to Michael Lamanello and Neil Bath for overseeing that. And Neil Bath is still at Chelsea, and Michael was there for about a decade. So I think in terms of some of the key decision makers, there has been quite a bit of consistency, obviously, just not at the managerial position.
Great. Listen, let's go on to another aspect of the Chelsea success story, which again, controversial, but equally, as you've already said, it was a business decision. It's generated revenue. It's not without its critics. And I'm talking about Chelsea's so-called farm system. This is recruiting huge amounts, dozens and dozens of young players in their late teens and early 20s who are really good prospects from around the world. Loaning them out more often than not to different partner clubs in different places around Europe and different places in England, and then rarely relatively rarely they'll get into the first team and they'll make the break, but more often than not, they will, be sold on quite often for big profits.
All of those deals, De Bruyne, Lukaku, Salah, brought money into Chelsea that they were able to then reallocate to other players. So, maybe they wouldn't have been able to sign the likes of N'Golo Kante, for example, if they didn't have that money coming in to sort of make sure that the books were sorted for financial fair play reasons.
And it's worth noting that on those players particularly, I did a study 3 years ago looking at the 20 farm players that Chelsea, well, calling them farm players, but 20 of these type of players who were basically signed, very rarely played for Chelsea and were sold years later for a profit. I looked at 3 years ago in 2018, I looked at a study of the 20 farm players that they'd sold recently, and these included Kevin De Bruyne. So they made an £11 million profit on Kevin De Bruyne after he played 3 times for them. They made a £6 million profit on Mo Salah after he'd only paid 13 times for them. And who was the third one that we were talking about? Lukaku. So Lukaku. They made £18 million profit on Lukaku after he'd only played 10 times for them. Amongst the group of players in that cohort they looked at, Patrick Bamford, £4.5 million profit, Ryan Bertrand, £9.9 million profit, Nathaniel Chalobah, £5 million profit, Nathan Ake, £20 million profit, and Bertrand Traore, £8.8 million profit. So those 20 players between them, who'd collectively been at Chelsea for something like 60 player years, had made a total of 126 appearances combined in 60 years, and had made £107.6 million in profit for Chelsea during that period of time.